Good morning, everyone. My name is Max Kovalov, and I'm the director of the Mroz Global Leadership Institute. I'm also an instructor of international studies here at the College of Charleston. The mission of the Mroz Global Leadership Institute is to promote essential skills of global fluency and educate new generations of students about diplomacy and global challenges. And global hunger and global food security is an important global challenge. I want to thank Provost Austin and President Xu for organizing this summit, and to Randy Russell for being here and bringing such an impressive, amazing team of professionals who are working on this important global challenge. Thank you for organizing this program, and it's a unique opportunity for the Mroz Institute to co-sponsor, co-host this summit on such an important global challenge of food security. For me personally, food security is, for many of us, food security is a personal challenge and personal collective memory. And for many people in the world, it's a painful collective memory. I was born in Ukraine, and in 1932-33, Ukraine experienced a state-orchestrated famine called the Holodomor. This program, or this famine, was organized by the state, by the leadership of Joseph Stalin, who was expropriating grain from Ukrainian peasants and selling it at world markets and to fund the industrialization program. My grandfather was 16 at the time. He almost starved to death. He was saved by a Jewish family in my hometown. He lived to the age of 97, and he is just one of the many people who were lucky to survive. But between 4 to 7 million people, 7 million Ukrainians, did not survive the Holodomor. They were starved to death. Thank you for organizing, for bringing this important topic for our discussion. We have an amazing group of guests from local and internationally oriented organizations, and it is my pleasure today to introduce our first guest speaker, Barron Segar. Barron Segar is President and CEO of the World Food Program USA, the nonprofit charged with inspiring and mobilizing people in the US to support the mission of the UN World Food Program to feed the world's hungriest people. Barron has more than 20 years of experience in philanthropic efforts. Under his leadership, World Food Program quadrupled its revenue. In 2021, the nonprofit Times recognized Barron on its Power and Influence Top 50 list for leadership. Barron is a leading voice on global food security and has been featured in many media outlets, including MSNBC, Forbes, The Hill, The Guardian, The Chronicle of Philanthropy. He has also led visits to field operations in Honduras, Guatemala, El Salvador. Last March, I think, he visited refugee centers in Ukraine for Ukrainians in Poland and on the Polish border of Ukraine to work on aid relief efforts of the UN World Food Program. Prior to the World Food Program USA, Barron served as an executive vice president and chief development officer at the UN Children's Fund, UNICEF USA. Barron is a founding and current board member of the Elton John AIDS Foundation and serves on the advisory board of Open Hand Atlanta. It's a nonprofit that creates access to healthy meals and nutrition education in diverse communities. He earned a bachelor's degree in history from Hampton-Sydney College in Virginia. Barron, thank you, and welcome to the College of Charleston.
Glad to be here. I also have to say, when Randy was giving the opening remarks, he didn't refer to me as entertaining, so I'm just going to say I'm known as an entertainer, so I'm not going to be boring, I promise, Randy. I do want to just start by recognizing Dan Glickman and Randy Russell. What you may not know is and others in the room today, when you are a board member, and in Randy's case, the board chair, this is a volunteer position. And the amount of time and energy that these two individuals have devoted to food and helping others is simply staggering. And I just want to thank both of them. I wouldn't be here, and we wouldn't be as successful without our board.
Thank you. I want to start with a few questions for Randy, and then we can open the floor for questions from our audience. We have about 40 minutes for our discussion. And I want to start with a broad question about your assessment of global food security today. It seems that recent crises, the pandemic and the Russian war in Ukraine, contributed to higher food insecurity in the world, but the problem's origins are going way deeper. Can you talk about the state of food security, global food security today?
So what I thought I would do is talk both about a lot of the challenges we're having, but also what some of the opportunities are, where we're seeing improvements around the world, opportunities around the world. Because candidly, I'm seeing both. I mean, the unfortunate situation of today is we are seeing an unprecedented level of hunger in the world. And, you heard the numbers, the 345 million people that suffer from acute malnutrition. And basically what that means is that you're not getting enough nutrients to grow. You're likely going to be stunted if you're a child, your brain's not going to develop, and you don't know where your next meal is coming from. I really stay up at night worrying about people that are on the verge of famine, and it's hard to believe because famine means that you are marching towards starvation. I just saw a statistic 2 days ago that in Somalia, which has seen years and years of drought, I mean, just in 2022, we lost 43,000 people because of the drought, because of a lack of food and a lack of water. And 50% of those were women and children. And so it's a staggering number. I would say that on the positive, we did avert global famine last year. It was widely predicted by the World Food Program, by other organizations that we work with. And so there's something to be said that the world did unite, and thank goodness for the U.S. government, the biggest funder of the World Food Program, that really helped us avert a widespread famine. So why? Why are we facing such a crisis? You heard Randy appropriately say conflict. Conflict is the number one reason why people are hungry. We can't get food when there's conflict. Food is used as a weapon of war. I mean, we have to face that. You try to starve your enemy. And so, we do see conflict as a main driver. Climate is also a significant factor. We have to acknowledge the world is heating up. We have countries around the world that have seen 4 and 5 years of drought. And so the ability of growing crops is really diminished. And I have to say cost. I mean, this is relevant to all of us. When you go to the grocery store today, you're seeing that your costs have gone up. So I was recently in Lebanon, and honestly wasn't really prepared for what I had seen, but from 2019 to 2022, inflation in Lebanon, 2,000%, staggering. And we saw people that were lining around the banks just to get $20 out of an ATM. That was the maximum you could get. So as everybody's freaking out about Silicon Valley Bank and those type of implications, these things are already happening in some countries. And then I would say, our costs at the World Food Program were going up about $71 million a month. And luckily, by the way, we're seeing some of those costs go down. So that's a positive. The price of oil has gone down. Container ships don't cost as much as they did about a year ago. And still seeing the effects of COVID. COVID displaced informal workers. The number of people that I meet in the field who've lost employment because they're working at a restaurant, they were doing some role in hospitality. And so I would say, again, that the headline is that we're facing the largest humanitarian crisis in our history, and that we have got to avert famine another year.
Thank you. It's a good overview of challenges and opportunities of your efforts. Can you talk more about the World Food Program and what the international community does today, what this institution does today to address such an important issue. And maybe you can talk briefly about the World Food Program, the UN program, and the US division.
So the World Food Program, we are boots on the ground. We're in 123 different countries. We have 20,000 people on the ground in 120 countries. That's pretty staggering. I would also say, you know, we pay tribute every day to our workers. They're giving up their families. They're giving up their livelihoods because they want to help people. And they're working in conflict zones, by the way, to make sure that the most vulnerable of the vulnerable get fed. It was, as was mentioned in the video, the World Food Program, the Nobel Peace Prize laureate in 2020. That was an incredible honor that very few organizations get. And the World Food Program received it because of our work successfully delivering supplies in conflict zones. I would also say it's the UN World Food Program, and the word UN does a lot, because when you're invited in to work in a country and you have a UN type of status, it gives you a seat at the table, working with governments, working with policymakers to make sure that the plight of those who are hungry, particularly women and children, have a voice, have a seat at the table. And then the World Food Program USA, our job, as Randy articulated, was really to activate the private sector in the United States, to activate voices. We need everybody here to use your voice, if not your philanthropy, use your voice to make sure that at the dinner table, at your sorority, your fraternity, as you're going through life, that you're advocating for people that sometimes need a voice. They don't have a voice. And then we also do a lot of work to, around our policymakers. This is a really big role that we play with Rebecca Middleton and our team. We have to make sure that policymakers are educated about the work that we're doing. We do staff delegations to the field. But I would say the main thing that we do is engagement. We engage people in the United States to use their voices, to use their philanthropy to ultimately save and protect lives. I would also say, when you think about the World Food Program, there really are two different things that we do. So you see the food drops. I mean, on any given day, the World Food Program has 5,600 trucks, 32 cargo ships, over 110 planes in the air every single day delivering supplies. We're like the logistics backbone of the UN. And I would say I'm grateful that all of you contribute to the World Food Program if you pay taxes. I know a couple of you said you didn't, but most of you do. So we are we're very appreciative of the U.S. taxpayer, policymakers, Republicans and Democrats that support us. And then, as Randy said, at the World Food Program USA, it's been nothing short of a movement. We've gone from having 19,000 donors to 150,000 donors. We've gone from 19 million in revenue to 174 million. But what I am most proud about is we do that with a 94% efficiency. So 94 cents of every dollar we raise goes to the field. Last thing I would say is, while we don't know each other, we're all aligned on hunger. And so I'm grateful that you're here today to learn a few things about hunger, the World Food Program, the World Food Program USA, so we can continue this journey together.
Thank you. I want to drill further into your field work and the kind of work that you do when you go to these places, when you say you put boots on the ground. After Russia invaded Ukraine a year ago, 2022, leaders like you were gravely concerned about food prices, about fertilizer prices, about the inability of Ukraine to export and take out the grain from its ports because the ports were blockaded by Russia. And then there was an agreement that was brokered by the UN and by Turkey, and this agreement alleviated some of the pressure, and prices returned back to normal. And as you said, this allowed us to avoid starvation, mass starvation, or another famine. And today, earlier this week, we heard that this agreement between Russia and Ukraine was extended by 60 more days. So this is good news. Last April, you traveled to the Polish border, or last March, you traveled to the Polish border, and you worked on the ground. You did field work in visiting centers for Ukrainians. What did you take away from that trip? And what do you usually do? What do you take away from the field work when you are on the ground? What are the needs of the people, for example, who are fleeing the conflict? So what is your experience with field work?
So Ukraine was very unique. The World Food Program didn't work in Ukraine. Ukraine was taking care of their own. And then all of a sudden, you have explosions where people are having to escape with their lives. So it was only 3 weeks after the attack. We had a philanthropist who wanted to go see it, and we invited other private sector partners to go. We were the first private sector group to go to the border of Ukraine and Poland. We flew into Krakow, went into a community called Siemiec, and I think the first thing that was so inspiring was the overwhelming response of the Polish people. So in Siemiec, I believe they have 60,000 residents. They took in 60,000 people that were refugees. They were traveling from their homes, and the mayor, all the politicians. I mean, can you imagine that? Like, if you had a room and you're having to escape a war, we have a place for you. And I thought that was, to me, I've never seen that before. And so I would say the Polish people were so warming and overwhelming and activated very quickly. I was very proud of the World Food Program. We went in there, we scaled, serving millions of people, but we also had to set up some of our infrastructure. Interesting enough, we also engaged the private sector to help us build warehouses. We had to ship our trucks in. You have to set up a brand new distribution system. And so, we're very good at pre-positioning supplies. So we had supplies that we could immediately ship in. The downside, by the way, to all of this is that there's only so much funding that goes around. And so while we had to scale up in Ukraine, we had to cut rations in Yemen. And I thought, I always think to myself, I can't imagine being that mother or that father who has to decide which child eats and which child doesn't eat. It's an awful choice to have to make, but there are limited resources everywhere we go. So we scaled. We do it through partnerships, and it's not just the World Food Program. We do a lot of contracting with other NGOs, and it's a big team on the ground, and we're right there now doing two different things. So one is where there's not access to a functioning marketplace, we do in kind. We're providing rice, oils, beans, lentils, other types of products to keep you alive. And then sometimes there's a protein, sometimes there's not. But one thing a lot of people don't know that the World Food Program does is we do a lot of cash-based transfers. So working with local institutions, could be a bank, could be a money transfer center. But if there is a functioning marketplace, and you've been identified as somebody that doesn't have the resources to buy food, you would generally get access to, say it's $100 and it's U.S. currency for a month that would allow you to buy food for your family. So a lot of different approaches. And then I would just a couple stories that I would say that honestly I would never get out of my mind. When we were in Siemiec, there's a train that comes in, and again, we're just 3 weeks into the war. We have to just remember that. So people were escaping with their lives, and a train came into the station, a train that normally carries 600 people. There were 2,700 people on this train, all women and children, because just as a reminder, if you're 18 or older as a male, you can't go, you can't leave. The husbands were there, and just the look of the moms and the kids really didn't know what was happening. They were there and they were getting off the train, but the moms were, they were saying goodbye to their sons, They were saying goodbye to their husbands. And we also saw a lot of kids that were disabled. And I just thought to myself, I'm glad that not only the World Food Program was there, but the Polish community, that other NGOs were there as well, doing the best that we can do to provide some kind of immediate relief. And then I would just say, we went into one of the centers. I met an 81-year-old grandmother. And when you leave to get on the train, you can only carry what you can. You don't have packing bags. It's not like you're at the airport checking 3 suitcases. You're carrying in your hands. And so Letta, who is the lady that I met, the only thing she carried was her dog and her cat. And we asked for her story if she'd be willing to tell us. And she is one night sleeping in her bed, a bomb goes off, shatters all the windows in her home, throws her from the bed onto the floor. And at that point, she knew that she needed to leave. Her husband was deceased, and her kids living in different parts of Europe. And then all of a sudden, here's an 82-year-old grandmother sleeping on a cot with her, and I just thought, but had her dog and her cat, but it was, relying on the kindness of other organizations to help her. But I just can't get out of my mind the look of what I saw. And the other thing that I will never forget is, while we saw a lot of people getting off the train, we saw a lot of people getting on the train to go back to Ukraine. We saw a lot of medics, people that were in Poland that just said, people getting hurt, I've got to go back, I've got to help, I have to save a life. But we saw a lot of wives that had migrated, they'd left Ukraine, and they had gone to Poland. And there was a 38-year-old mom that we went up and talked to, because we didn't understand why somebody would be getting on the train to go back to Ukraine. And she, very teary-eyed, said, if I'm going to die, I'm going to die with my son, and I'm going to die with my husband. Being here is too painful, and I need to be with my family.
A grave sense of urgency and amazing experience, and thinking about the devastation that people have been going through. I have a couple of more questions for you, but I want to take a few questions from the audience. If you have a question for our speaker, for our guest, please use one of the microphones.
And I would also say, feel free to ask a question that could be about careers, could be about hunger and food, could be about what it's like to work with Randy Russell. I mean, anything's on the table here.
Do you mind introducing yourself and tell us what you study?
Yes, my name is Theo Anastopoulos, and I don't go to the College of Charleston. I've studied food insecurity at the Fletcher School at Tufts University. Last year you said famine was averted globally, but you also said that just this year, AP News reported 43,000 deaths in Somalia over 6 consecutive failed rainy seasons. I must ask, is the geographic and temporal definition of an IPC Phase 5 famine too restrictive? If 43,000 people in Somalia are dead, but that's not declared a famine, forgive me, but surely you see how bizarre that must sound. And I wonder, how does the World Food Program consider these limitations, especially as the impacts of climate change are only worsening?
So thank you for that question. A lot of times it's the governments that release the documentation to us, work with other NGOs. I would also say that, like, within a country like Somalia, there are pockets of famine. So it doesn't mean the entire country is in famine.
And that's a geographic limitation, though, is it not?
Absolutely it is. I would say this, in my travel to the field and working in different countries, very few countries want to acknowledge that they're in famine, and we have to just acknowledge that. But one of the things with having a ground presence is we know where famine is occurring. Do I think we're going to see widespread famine in the coming year? I do. And I think that it's going to be too hard for countries to deny that they're in a widespread famine. I would say that I had a conversation with with another humanitarian group, and we talked about declaring famine. And they said that they never declare famine in a country. This is a well-known big NGO, global NGO. And the reason is because they said they don't want to declare famine in an entire country, because famine rarely occurs in an entire country. It occurs within geographic areas of a country. But I would say there is very specific data to show where famine should be declared. I do think that you're going to see more widespread famine, but you are right. I mean, when the statistics came out 2 days ago that 43,000 people died, and by the way, a variety of different sources, lack of water, lack of food, lack of healthcare, but the main driver, lack of food.
Thank you for your question. Any other questions from students, from general audience, from our guests?
So I have a question for you. I'm a lifelong student here at the College of Charleston. As if you know me, I teach as an instructor, but I'm from Tanzania, East Africa, where famine was common, so Max's story resonates with me. So my question really, the story you painted of people going into war and just starvation in many cases, this is the land of plenty, the United States. I mean, just look at the back over here. At the end, we'll probably waste some food. But how do we communicate this sense of urgency of famine, not only globally, but also here in the United States to our students? And how do we get through, the daily social media, the noise, the stats that we just quoted over here? The best thing sometimes is to take our students to study abroad. But is there any other way, suggestions from NGOs to really get our students engaged and involved? I know this is a wonderful opportunity for our students because we're bringing terrific speakers to our campus, and this is just one of many ways we can engage our students in solving some of these problems globally. Any suggestions?
So I'm going to take your question in two different parts. One is, I would say, when you think about a UN organization, we're truly nonpartisan. So we have to work with, like, I'll use Ethiopia as an example. We have to work with the military fractions. We have to work with the government. We have to work with all parties. And so a lot of times what we're doing, working within the UN system, is working behind the scenes. So it's not necessarily very public, but because we've had a presence in so many of these countries since 1961, we're invited into work. We're working with policymakers and government officials. It allows us to negotiate a lot of peace and broker peace deals. We mentioned the Black Sea Agreement. I would say that we have to raise awareness to what is happening. We have to amplify the voices. So I would just say, what you as students can do right now is look at how you can use your voices, your social media platforms. Maybe not TikTok today, but I would say your other social media platforms, to make sure that the world knows what's happening. We have to have a discussion about it. I believe that's where it starts. Think about your community, your campus groups here. We need leaders to do more. And then I would say, as you think about your careers, this is very important. You could work for a big company, but big companies do a lot of philanthropy. They do a lot of creation. And so for me, and one of my visions as the CEO is to really engage the private sector, but it's not just about money. I happen to believe that the private sector, and so say you end up working for a tech company or you end up working for a food and ag company. I mean, we do work with Microsoft, Cargill, John Deere. There's so many companies that we work with. But what we need, and my plea to companies, is to lend us your experience. So UPS maybe is a good example. I had the honor of going last Monday, meeting with Carol Tomei, who's the president of UPS and the foundation. And she said, what can we do better? What do you need us to do more of? And I said, first of all, continue the journey with hunger, but there are two things that we need. One is we need your experience. You're the expert at supply chain. Look at what we do. We're doing logistics. We need you to continue to come in, look at our operations, and make recommendations for efficiency. I said, and the other thing is continue to invest in innovation. I happen to believe that if we innovate, we will solve global hunger. And by the way, let's not forget that for 9 years, Going up to 2015, hunger was on the decline. But then war and climate really took over. So I believe that we can reverse it, but we have to come up with really innovative solutions. So, we're talking with the College of Charleston about ways of partnering right now. So we'll look forward to hearing about that. And follow us on social media. And I would also say, we have 20,000 staff members at the global organization. So as you think about careers, or at the World Food Program USA, think about us.
Hi, thank you very much. LACWA Advisory Board. I have something to do with the Mroz Institute. I'm glad you brought up Lebanon because my background and interest has been the Middle East, particularly the refugee situation. And I think I've been working with some folks on the crisis in Lebanon, and it's very important to bring a focus to that because I think it's higher now, 1 out of 4 individuals in Lebanon is a refugee. And since 49, they took in the Palestine refugees. Now they're 1 of 3, along with Jordan and Turkey, recipients of Syrian war refugees. If you can, could you talk a little bit about what you saw when you were there? Because I think that crisis on many fronts, but particularly hunger, is increasing exponentially. And we're just not, with all the other crises in the world, we're not hearing a lot about Lebanon. Thank you.
So thank you for that question. Lebanon had a series of things that happened. Let's not forget they had the port blast. And so their ability to import food was significantly handicapped. And then Lebanon is the net importer of food. And so one of the things that we're doing in Lebanon, we're investing in smallholder farmers. We're using hydroponics. We saw that time and time again. And we're investing to make sure that Lebanon has the ability of growing their own food. They import way too much food. And so training farmers, investing in farmers to ultimately reduce their need to import. We do a lot of school feeding. So one of the things that the World Food Program does right now, which is one of our pillar programs, is last year we fed 15 million school children. And by the way, that benefits, and we do this in Lebanon at a significant way. So the parents come in, they're making the meals, and it's not an extravagant meal. It's a vegetable that's grown locally, and then there's some kind of a pasta, or in this case, it was a pita bread and a cheese. And many cases, the only meal these kids got in a single day. So it did a few things. One is it got the parents together, having food in the schools, allowing these kids to get an education. And the other thing that school feeding does, all of our funding for school feeding, it supports local communities, local farmers. So there's some sustainability there. So within Lebanon, I went and I visited a number of programs where the World Food Program is investing in machinery. And this may sound, I thought this was such an innovative idea. So we went to one center, and there were piles and piles of vegetables that were imperfect. They couldn't be taken to the market. So we'd invested in a machine it's a conveyor belt that takes vegetables to a dryer, dries it, then bags it, and then you export it for soups and things like that. And so, investing in agriculture in Lebanon, investing in school feeding to make sure that kids have access to a meal, and training smallholder farmers, and also this is where the ports come in, making sure that trade is flowing. We have to remember that when COVID struck, the first thing that countries wanted to do was to close their borders. And that's the worst thing that can happen. And, so it inhibits the export of grain, inhibits the export of rice, and the ultimate people that suffer are those that we're trying to help. So, and then you mentioned the refugees. So I went to a home of a family. They were from Lebanon, and then a separate home, a family from Syria. And because there are functioning marketplaces in Lebanon, both families were getting a cash voucher each month to buy food. And one family said, "Would you like to go with me to the store?" And of course, I've never met a store I didn't love. So went to the grocery store, and you can't buy, you have to buy, produce. So that, they went in and they bought a big bag of tomatoes and vegetables. And it was a debit card, and the only certain, there are hundreds of, I think there are like 500 stores in Lebanon that take our vouchers. And the families are trained how to cook a healthy meal, and what not to buy and what to buy. So I saw where the cash voucher system was helping a lot of people. We're now supporting 1.8 million people today in Lebanon. Out of a country, I think there's 6 or 7 million people in the entire country. I would also say I left there thinking this is a country that's going to get, they're going to get they're going to get back to sustaining themselves. I really believe that. Just had a number of unfortunate things. But I would also say there's no political leadership. And we have to acknowledge that, is that part of functioning countries is you've got to have semi-functioning leadership, governments that are not fighting each other in war, but they're coming together with solutions. I'll just end on the story that I went in and spoke to a family who they were from Syria. They went to Lebanon. They were in a very small area, a house, if you will. And the mom and her 3 kids, and they talked about school, and 2 of the 3 kids were benefiting from the school feeding program, from the World Food Program. They were getting the cash voucher. And one of the younger son, who was 14, was just kind of down there on he was like this, just wasn't sitting and wasn't on the pillow, but just kind of quiet. And I thought he was sick. And so we left, and I told the person who had escorted us in, I said, is that young boy okay? I worry about his health. And they said he has post-stress disorder because he saw his father killed. And it's just a reminder of not only the ability to deliver food, but these young people and what they have seen and what no young person or adult should ever have to see. I'm looking forward to going back to Lebanon, by the way, likely going back in June. And what we did, so when we got back, we then activated our supporters to support school feeding in Lebanon because they had a shortage. They couldn't reach the number of schools they needed to reach. So we made a grant at the World Food Program USA to the World Food Program, $1 million to activate school feeding. By the way, 32 cents a meal. That's what it costs for a school meal today.
Catherine, do you mind using the microphone?
You got to separate you two.
A couple questions. I have a real problem with the idea that there should be food insecurity in the United States. I personally live in an area near a park where we have homeless encampments all around us. And I will drop off bags of boxed foods or other things that I think can help people. Right now, our schools, including the college with Aramark, anything that's left back here gets thrown out. I even used them for my father's funeral, and there was so much food that was left, and unless we brought our own containers, they would not even allow us they wouldn't pack it up for us to take and use. And I was beyond livid. I think that is a policy that absolutely needs to change. All of our grocery stores, the foods that are expired, which means basically nothing. It's a requirement that they put up expiration date on it. But our institutions, grocery stores, restaurants, all the rest are no longer allowed to distribute food at the end of the day. When I go to a restaurant and we have food left over, I will say, give that to me, give me all the bread, whether I want it or not, and then I will, especially down, say, in Key West, where there's a young homeless population, I'll drop that food off these people. I don't generally give money to the homeless because of what it might purchase, but I will give them food. And I think that that is a policy in this country that absolutely must change, that if we are not using the food that we have, we must do something. We also need to change the nutrition requirements, what we think is acceptable. Rice and beans is a great staple, and not everybody needs, meat as a protein source. In other countries, they eat a lot of rice and beans, and it's as inexpensive as you can get and provide somebody nutritional needs. As far as other countries, it's way beyond my scope of knowledge, but I do worry about our corporations which have taken over family farms. So we now have these Cargills, Monsantos, all the rest who are promoting their pesticides, herbicides, fertilizers that are full of toxic chemicals. We are destroying our plants that are even sold at places like Lowe's that have neonicotinoids on them that are killing our honeybees and further damaging our pollinators. We are finding that in our own bodies, and the harbor in the college of, in Charleston has the highest level of flame retardants in the world. We have a Kevlar plant up. And so if you were to have your blood taken and you eat fish, you not only have these toxic chemicals in you, you also have plastics and other things that we are being very remiss about controlling. So I don't know whether you have anything to do with, excuse me, I'll wrap it up, anything to do with your impact on these companies and the chemicals that they're using, which are causing other health issues, not only here, and certainly we can reduce our own population if that happens, but in other countries.
Thank you for the question. As we often say, there's enough food in the world to feed everybody. But the problem is that the access to the most vulnerable is sometimes the hardest. I'll answer your question in a couple different ways. I'll go back to, there are a lot of countries, when I was in El Salvador, they have an issue with obesity. And so before a mother or a parent can get a voucher or a food voucher, they're required to go through a training of foods to buy and foods not to buy. And that's a condition of getting this food card. And so we have seen that through our purchasing process that more healthy food is being purchased. And then the grocery stores, the food centers, they give us a list every month about what was purchased. And we look at that, we review it, and then if there are training opportunities, we need to revise what we're doing. We're certainly going to do that. I would say that from the hungry, what I'm most worried about is famine, and but we also share the belief that hunger is not just a problem in Ethiopia and Yemen and parts of the world, that it's here happening in our backyards, and we have a responsibility to make sure people have access to nutritious, healthy food to allow them to build and sustain their bodies. And then on the corporate question, I was thinking, I'm so glad my board member from Cargill is not here today. But I do think that there is a responsibility. And one of my goals as the CEO of the World Food Program USA is to work with companies to bring them on board to see how we can help them be better corporate citizens, that they have a responsibility. And what you'll find is that most companies really do. And the last thing I'll say is at the World Food Program, we have something called due diligence, and basically where we screen a lot of companies before we can work with them. The one thing that I would like us to do more of is when we screen a company and we say we can't work with you because of your practices, could be around trafficking, could be around what you sell. I would, my priority is to work with those companies to make them fit for purpose. I would say that I've worked with Coca-Cola before. I petitioned Coca-Cola to try to change how they that they would, as opposed to saying that a child that they market to is age 12 and below, raise it to 18. So I think there are a lot of things that we're doing to work with companies to make them much better citizens, to make sure that when they're marketing products in countries that they're also giving healthy options.
We have time for one more question.
Hello, my name is Lei Jing, Asian Studies. I'm curious, do you program with China? Because China is kind of unique position. We know government really have tight control on everything. And if they do, relieve the information, have famine, what kind of special challenge you face when you work with China? Thank you.
Thank you. We do work with China. Our platform and our main programs in China are tied to school feeding. So we have offices in China. But our main role in China is also technical assistance. We advise the governments around how to provide healthy food for their citizens, around proper nutrition. But most of it is tied to ensuring that children have access to healthy food and have access to a really good education. But it's tied, again, technical assistance, advising governments on how to elevate their spending to make sure that there's access across the board to food. China also, I would say, is a funder of the World Food Program. We'd like to see a higher level of funding through China, but we do work in China.
I have 1 minute, and then so maybe to leave our discussion on an optimistic note. Do you have what programs or experiences make you optimistic about food security in the world?
So I have to say, one of my trips fairly recently, we went to very rural area. We go to very rural areas. We don't typically stay in the city center. And I met a number of female farmers, and they had established a co-op. Everybody has 2-3 acres, and they were growing. By the way, there are like 7 types of corn, so they were doing a corn that was more hardy when it came to drought. They were doing potatoes, and so. I looked at what the World Food Program was doing to train these farmers around inventory and helping them take their products to the market. But the part of the story that I loved was there was a group of young kids that was looking at us, and we had World Food Program. I was wearing my vest, and they were just kind of, maybe 100 feet away. So I walked up to them and I said, "Hey, I'm just curious. I know that." We talk a lot about migration and a lot of young people that want to come to the U.S., they want a better life, and I noticed that you're here. Are you ever tempted? Do you talk about leaving your families and coming to the U.S.? And this young boy and young girl said, a lot of our friends have migrated, but we're not. And I said, well, I'd love to know why you decided to stay. And they said, because through the World Food Program, we have jobs. And then he said, look at these acres of farm. He said, we have jobs, we have income, we have food, and we have an education. There's no reason for us to leave. And so for me, that was that aha moment that we were providing, working with our partners, opportunities so that young people didn't feel so desperate that they had to leave in the middle of the night, risk their lives to try to go somewhere and a journey that was much more dangerous. And that made me extremely proud to work for the World Food Program.
That's very inspiring. Barron, thank you so much for this discussion.